As previously noted, this part of the presentation reflects the application of the different types of graphics, the different categories of graphics, and how those different types can be used to support the learning of specific types of learning outcomes or learning objectives. Here on the screen is represented sort of the classic representation of Bloom's revised taxonomy. And again, this is a taxonomy of the different types of cognitive learning outcomes or cognitive skills. Bloom and his colleagues created other taxonomies for different types of mental processing and learning. Affective domain is a different looking pyramid. But this is revised. It includes create, evaluate, and analyze all on the top level at about the same. It's represented at sort of the top, the same level of sort of cognitive processing. I like the word create instead of the word synthesize, which was the category from the previous taxonomy. But this is one way to represent different types of learning outcomes. It's good. However, in the field of instructional design, sometimes the categories are communicated in ways that reflect really more of the type of skill rather than sort of the general category that it reflects. And let me give you an example, because we're going to be looking at different types of graphics and how they support different types of learning as they apply to Bloom's taxonomy, but also as they apply to a more precise type of cognitive skill. So facts and concepts are two types of skills that are relatively analogous to the remember and understand level of Bloom's taxonomy. And then we have processes, procedures, and principles, types of skills that reflect application, analysis, evaluation, and creation. What I like about the processes, procedures, and principles is that they're a little more, or I should say a little less abstract than words like analyze and evaluate. You'll have to admit it's somewhat difficult to differentiate between apply, analyze, and evaluate when it comes to sort of verbs that are used to describe a type of learning. So I'm going to present just a quick overview of the different types of instructional graphics that were presented earlier in light of sort of both of these taxonomies. So the first are decorative graphics, and there's that cute little roundy owl perched atop a book. It's a decorative graphic. You could imagine that graphic being used in a number of different situations when communicating information to help students learn some specific skills. And typically, decorative graphics, which add aesthetic appeal, humor, or attention-getting strategies, typically those could be used to support the learning of any type of skill. Directing learners' attention to a particular piece of information, again, could be useful in any situation. So if you've got a decorative graphic, again, that's something that could typically support the learning of any type of outcome. Now again, representational graphics or representations are those graphics that depict objects in realistic fashion, and these in this example from the previous video, the idea of representing buckets and sticks as a way of communicating visually information that might be presented verbally in a word problem. Those are representational graphics, and typically representational graphics are used to aid in supporting the learning of facts and concepts, or at the Bloom's level, remembering and understanding. So this is a good example of using representational graphics to help learners understand the information presented in a word problem better. And again, it could be beneficial to some types of learners who need it. Others may not need it, but that's generally and typically the use of representational graphics. And these, again, this is all supported by research on efficacy of graphics in instructional situations. Now, as presented earlier, mnemonic graphics provide retrieval cues for factual information. They could be used to support, in this case, the performing of rules, which are kind of higher up the cognitive food chain. But mnemonics, again, are used to aid in remembering, in this case, sort of remembering the order of things. And so, again, mnemonics are very good for facilitating skills that are factual. Organizational graphics show qualitative relationships among content. Venn diagrams are a great example of that, as depicted. Instructionally, these types of graphics are beneficial to support the learning of facts and concepts, or in the Bloom world, remembering and understanding things. Now, again, relational graphics show quantitative relationships among two or more variables. So quantitative being sort of numerical values, very, very applicable in math instruction, obviously. And relational graphics support the learning of concepts and processes. So that really covers, in Bloom's world, kind of everything except remembering. Or in the old pyramid, that would be knowledge, which again is a very ambiguous term used to describe lots of things. But supporting the learning of concepts and processes, that is when you want to ensure that relational graphics are part of the instructional presentation. Again, transformational graphics show changes in objects over time or space. And this example that was pulled from the literature shows an example of a transformational graphic, and you're going to learn more about these types of graphics later when we get really more specific about visual representations and manipulatives. But in this case, it's a graphic. It's a real basic kind of bar chart, or it's a simple kind of chart that shows a change over time that helps support understanding the information in the word problem. It supports the learning of processes, procedures, or principles. So this is a good example of a transformational graphic. And from Bloom's perspective, the application, analysis, evaluation, and creation types of skills are again supported by this type of graphic. And finally, interpretive graphics illustrate a theory or principle. And these support concepts, processes, and principles, which again are analogous to, in Bloom, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So from here, you're going to move on to learning about a type of mathematical set of graphics, visual representations and manipulatives that can be used to support the learning of specific types of math outcomes. So this general big picture view addresses types of instructional graphics in general and their general support for instructional purposes over in specific types of learning outcomes. And now you're going to move on to more specific types of graphics that support the learning of different types of math outcomes that can be beneficial to a number of different types of learners in your class.